Excited for a warm weekend. Wanted to start really quick by showing this cool design that Robin made for Rhonda. Rhonda had the idea, put it in a flower pot right outside of her listing. Has some branding, has personal branding. It's just a good way, just another good way you can advertise yourself at your listings. So, as you guys know, Robin is our agent resource specialist here, and Rockin' Robin, and she is able to. She's a resource to you. If you have something in mind that you would like for her to design, contact Robin and ask her to work on it for you. Our general rule of thumb is that if she works on something, she wants to be able to provide it to all of our agents, right? So it's not just exclusive to you. So if you give her an idea, we're going to put it in the agent resources, and other agents are going to be able to utilize it, because that's how it's that way it works. It works for us as a brokerage to be able to pay her for her time working for you if we're able to provide it to all of our agents. So anyways, this is something cool that Robin designed and Rhonda thought of, that if you guys would like to start using it, just reach out to Robin. She can make it for any of your listings.
Or if you'd like to provide your buyers with a flower pot and something like this, that's cool too. So
yeah, it's an awesome gift idea.
Take action. Just do it like Nike. Get busy. Stay humble. Hustle. Be ethical. Get her done. All right, we're going to talk about the 22AR. That's the financing addenda in the purchase and sale agreement as it applies to the listing side of your business as well as to the selling side of your business. And there's a touchy subject in there on the section 3 because people don't understand it. And when people don't know something, they're uncomfortable. And then they shouldn't talk, but a lot of people talk, right? And then they start babbling. And then people just tend to, since they don't know, die off on the subject. And this 22A section 3 doesn't get used much. That's my opinion, but we all know that's the way it is in life. So just simply learn this and know it, because you'll be in the 5% of the real estate industry by doing it. The other thing is you're going to be doing a huge favor to both your seller and your buyer. Now, in English, really what it means is that you have 30 days, if it's not filled in that blank, that the seller has the right to give the buyer a notice in a 22AR form to terminate. It does not force the buyer to waive their financing contingency. However, that's an option. And if the buyer does that, then the seller cannot terminate and the buyer locks them in. Much like the building inspection, if the buyer were to ask the seller to fix some things and the seller signed off on it, now it's locked in and we've satisfied and waived the building inspection. So back to the 22A, section 3, a 22AR delivered by seller at 30 days. You have to wait 30 days. And then 3 days thereafter, the seller could terminate if they want, but if the buyer forwards back that they waived their finance contingency, we're now locked in on the financing contingency. And at that point in the purchase and sale agreement, you've gone past the inspection, the appraisal, you've got title, and now you're saying, hey, I'm going to put my earnest money up because I'm going to get a loan, and we're going to closing as a buyer. Seller then is comfortable, has confidence that they can go on with all the moving plans that they made and all the costs that they have in order to do so, that if the buyer were to fail financing, that they don't get their earnest money back. If the buyer doesn't waive the financing contingency and the buyer fails to get a loan by no fault of their own prior to the end of that transaction, then guess what? Seller gets no earnest money. Buyer gets their earnest money back, and you've got some very unhappy sellers that don't have any compensation for all of their plans to move. You have professionals like the lender, the real estate brokers, and the appraiser is going to get paid by the lender with no compensation. So the best thing to do here is, it's a little complicated, but if you said, we later did do a purchase and sale agreement, or we even got in our car to show a buyer homes, who wants to waste their time with somebody that hasn't, got their ducks in a row? They think they do. They get a pre-approval letter from the lender, but there's conditions left, like get your taxes in, get your W-2s, get all your debt and your credit, run a background, make sure that they don't have judgments, and that they got a landlord verification of rent, and that they still have, a pulse and breathe and a job when it comes to closing. These are all conditions. Nobody is approved unless you're just golden and you've got millions in the bank and you have private banking. So be careful and watch this stuff and stay focused on financing, whether it's buyer or seller, because nobody wants to waste any time. Stay on the lender, press them for the conditions to be cleared, and if you're a seller on a listing, change it from 30 days to 20 days. Because after the building inspection and the appraisal, it's going to be about 20 days, and that's why that's fair. And then you have to wait 3 days to get that back from the buyer. So that's 23 days in. Once you've delivered the 22 AR, you don't want to make that paragraph section 3 any longer than 20 days. From a buyer's perspective, you can make your offer sweeter. Make that blank 20 days. It shows that you put thought into it. You can even put it in a side email and a conversation on the phone with the other broker. We're going to do our inspection quick. We're a solid buyer. Here's a letter from my lender. And it just goes to prove that we can get this thing done, the loan that is, all conditions met within 20 days.
Do you want to pull up
So,
the Form 20A so that they can see it?
With that being said, if you have any questions, check out the forms manual and call me, because it is a little bit confusing. I probably didn't talk about it in any order that would make sense, but honestly, it's not a very easy order to follow. Please call me, look at the forms manual, and get with me on any questions. So I'm going to pull up the forms manual real quick, just to show you what we're talking about with a section that I've talked about on section 3.
You need to zoom in with your thing.
And here's where we are. Section 3, seller's right to terminate. Read that paragraph. It's just what I said it is. And the 22 AR you can see on line 38 there could be delivered at the blank time in there. If this is left at 30, then you're going to deliver it, and guess what? 33 days in, the buyer doesn't reply. The earnest money is not up, but you're going to close in a couple days anyways, aren't you? Because loans usually are 30 to 40 days. Not a good chance you're going to get this thing signed off. That's a risky place to be in. Get this thing to 20 days, okay? And then you can pull up the 22 AR in the forms manual too. All forms you should be pulling up in the forms manual. Easy reference with little numbers you can see in red. What are those? Those are the lawyers who wrote this form explaining it to you what it means. So make sure you use the forms manual. Never be afraid or intimidated to call myself or Isaac or collaborate with your brokers at the office. I just clicked on 10. It took me right to the explanation of seller's right to terminate. Insert the number of days that the seller must wait before the seller has the option of delivering the right to terminate notice, which is a 22 AR. After that time period has passed, the seller may give the right to terminate notice at any time. The notice provides that the seller will have the right to terminate the agreement within 3 days of the delivery of notice. After the seller gives the right to terminate notice, the buyer will have 3 days to decide whether or not to waive their financing contingency. That's when they're going to be calling their lender to say, hey, for sure, am I in? Am I approved as long as I stay alive? And then it says if buyer does not waive the financing contingency within the 3-day period, the seller may unilaterally terminate the agreement at any time thereafter by giving a second notice. And please note that the buyer's ability to waive the financing contingency is not limited to 3-day time period. So if the seller doesn't terminate on the 4th day, the buyer still can waive it on the 4th day. However, after 3 days, the buyer is at risk with the seller having the right to terminate the transaction at any time. All right, I'm not going to read further. A lot of contract law. We can talk about it any time. I always tell my buyers and sellers, the reason you hire me, you're not going to find out. I do my job. I do it well. And the scary parts of this business are why you hire me. And it's all this legalese. So do not be afraid to talk to us about this stuff and keep yourself out of hot water. It's always best to be proactive and not get in hot water. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to get in hot water and learn from some situations, and that's okay. That's life. But let's do the best we can to avoid them, all right? Back to you, Isaac.
I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on that. I've seen Craig in listing presentations. That's mine. I've seen Craig in listing presentations where he knows he's competing against other agents, and he'll say, let's be honest, other agents are going to say they do the same thing when it comes to pictures, right? We all claim we have the best pictures. We all claim we have the best marketing. We all claim, we set open houses, and we all do, right? That's where we're all actually pretty even. Agents are, some agents, won't send open houses, but whatever. We're all pretty even, right? He says where, like he just alluded to, where you can really shine for your client is in the fine print of the legal paperwork. So, so going through the Form 22A with the agent, with your seller, when you're on a listing appointment, can really blow them away. And showing them, listen, the vast majority of agents will not bring this up. They will have no idea what the Form 22AR is. They'll have no idea that when they get multiple offers, they should go into the Form 22A that is in the everyone's going to have in their offers, and it's almost always going to be blank, and they should counter this at 20 days.
Right, Isaac. And what we do in our listings is we put in the agent remarks. You could go to my recent one that's pending. And I just quickly say your timelines for the 35, tighten them up. 22A, no more than 20 days. So you spell it out so that you don't get an offer that you have to counter and wait for the buyer to reply to when you have two other offers that may go away. You don't want to counter in a situation with multiple offers. So get them to fill it in. You can even put a supplement up under the MLS of what is a good offer. And we have templates for that. You want buyers to put in their earnest, right? The word earnest. I love this house. My kids love it. My lender wrote you a letter, and I'm willing to waive that financing addenda, the 22AR. If that's whatever they could do to make you feel confident, they're not going to yank your chain and back out on this thing. So we're talking specifically about the 22A here in regards to that. We've educated the industry. A lot more people are using it. But back in 2015 of July, when this was instituted, the lawyer at the MLS meeting with 1,000 people in the room asked, "Who's using this?" 3 people waved their hand. One of them me. And he says, you all should be using this. Now take that to heart out. Everything we said, are you kidding me? That many people were using it? That's horrible. There's a reason for this. When the lending industry changes and they start asking for extensions because the guidelines are tightening up and they can't get the loan done, well, guess what? You're not going to be closing in 25 days on conventional and 30 on FHA. It's going to stretch out 5 or 10 more days. And you're going to have some loans that fall off the map. Well, if you don't get the buyer to waive their financing, they don't get a loan by no fault of their own. They get their earnest money back. This isn't just about the earnest money not going to the seller. This is about you not getting paid. And furthermore, it's about the moving truck that was already scheduled. The notice, of where I'm going to relocate my job. The purchase that they made in the Carolinas, the seller. Are you kidding me? This is crazy. You can't even get enough earnest money to cover that. All right, so be careful on that subject.
So I just want to show the example of 22AR so people can see what that looks like, and how it will play out when you actually utilize this, right? So again, if in doubt, open up the manual. The manual explains everything just like Craig and I are doing.
It's not as passionate.
So this is what it's going to look like. A normal form like you'd see in a purchase and sale agreement. Buyer's information, seller's information, the address, the offer date. So what you're going to do is you're going to check the first box, the seller's right to terminate. It says seller hereby gives notice that if the buyer does not waive their financing contingency, seller may terminate this agreement and anytime 3 days after delivery of this notice. So just to translate, it's really, really simple. You deliver this notice and the buyer has the option to waive their financing, and now it's been, at least 20 days. Sometimes it's been 30 if you haven't already countered that. So they should have everything, all their ducks in a row, right? They should be able to waive their financing. But if they don't, now you can terminate, and that's just putting the power back in your in your seller's hands, because the sellers don't really have an out. As you know, a buyer has all kinds of outs. A buyer has the out, they can look at the Form 17 and say, oh, never mind, I didn't realize this, and they can back out. They can do an inspection and say, for any reason, I back out. Their financing can fall through and they can back out, right? They have all kinds of outs, but a seller has to go through with it. There's really no outs for them.
Yep. So the only out the seller's got is if it comes in lower than the appraised amount, or the appraiser asks for a condition, and those aren't even outs because the buyer could still choose to buy the home at a higher price.
Right. You'd say the same about an inspection, right? The buyer can request for X, Y, and Z to be repaired after an inspection. The seller could say, I'm not going to do any of them. And guess what? The buyer can still say, okay, I'll buy the house anyways. So really, the seller has no outs.
The only place the seller can get out is if the appraiser asks for some conditions to be repaired, they don't have to repair them. Now, that'd be sabotaging the sell. Probably unlikely, but just so you know, that's it. You really don't have too many outs as a seller. So, here's a buyer. Let's say another example. Buyer has $1,000 earnest money, or maybe $3,000. That's not too much. What if a house comes up that's a fantastic deal? They don't terminate this one or give anybody notice of the one that you're working with, and they put an offer in on the other. They could do that because they can get out on that one. But let's say they get their offer accepted, they like it, and they lose $3,000 earnest money for terminating the transaction with you for wrongful cause, and they move on with the other one. They could do that. So be really careful about what you're doing here and understand all the possible nuances, and definitely just focus on this 22A and 22AR. It's a very, very big caveat to the purchase and sale that people don't understand that could really impress your sellers and buyers, and it will keep you out of hot water. If you don't use this and it comes back on you, it could be proven that you didn't do the best for your buyer or seller by exercising these rights.
And again, I just want to say, explain this when you're meeting with a buyer for the first time or a seller for the first time, and explain how you're going to if you're representing the buyer, you're going to say 20 days because it makes your offer more attractive. If you're representing the seller, say you're going to counter offers with 20 days on the 22AR to protect them, so that they have the option to terminate if the buyer does not waive their financing, right? Utilize that and point out, because again, all the listing appointments, they're going to be pretty similar. Everyone's going to say, oh, I market it on social media, I do open houses. Everyone does that, right? We all have a pretty similar spiel. It's the little things and the things that are in the negotiations that you're really going to win it. And the negotiations are after you get the deal. So try and explain how you're going to negotiate for them. And when you bring this up, their next appointment, they're not going to bring this up. I can almost guarantee you.
Nope. But I'll tell you what, you want to make sure that you reiterate that in emails when the situations come up. So like we discussed when I first met you, I do that often. So we'll talk about all that in another meeting. There's so much to talk about. We love what we do. We're passionate about what we do. It's about service to the end, whether the end is termination or the end is success. You'll have easy things in this business. You make thousands of dollars. You'll have things that you make $0. It's called work. Make sure you want to get off that pillow in the morning and go to work. You can find a job anywhere else, okay? Get busy, stay ethical, stay humble, and hustle.
Actually, I wanted to, because we have a little more time, while we're on the topic, I think we should also go over to 22AL, because it's right along the same lines. So let's go back to 22A really quick. This will just take a moment because it's simpler. So right here on section 2.
Before you segue there, so we're done with that topic on the details of hardcore financing approval towards the end of the sale. What Isaac's going to do here is he's going to come back earlier on in the contract, and we're going to talk about financing and just a check-in on the buyer for English terms. We're checking in. Okay, go ahead, Isaac.
And again, this is another thing you want to utilize when you're trying to win a listing, right? Say I would say to them, when you're interviewing other brokers, see if they bring this up. They probably won't. But right here, the section 2A, it says seller's request for loan information. At any time, blank days, 10 days if not filled in after mutual acceptance, seller may give once a notice requesting information related to the status of the buyer's loan application, okay, via the Form 22AL. So I'll open up the Form 22AL and show you what that looks like.
So loans have conditions, people. Yeah, you got to have a heartbeat and stay alive, and the job in the end. They need to call the landlord and make sure you weren't a schmuck. But there's conditions, and we should all know what these are, and it has to do with finances, right? So you got to turn in your tax returns for the last 2 years, pay stubs, debt, income, and Social Security number, and they got to run it and all that. And so what point are they in the financing application? If they've only given a authority over the phone with their social security number, that's called pre-qualification. Look at the letter. Make sure you understand it, okay? Because we want these buyers, in section 1 of the financing addendum states that the buyer has blank days to make an application for a loan for this specific property, not the pre-approval letter that you have, because it's not to a specific property. So you could turn in a pre-approval letter with your offer, but they got to turn around and get another letter in within blank days. It's 5 if that's not changed. Once they turn that in, it should have conditions left to meet on the loan. And then we get into this section that we're talking about here where we get another update. But Isaac, go ahead and direct them to what I'm talking about.
Talking about right here, number 7 here. This is a timeline. I learned this a year ago, and I had already been in the business for over 2 years. And I had not read the fine print here. This is exactly what Craig just said. This is saying that buyers shall make application for the loans to pay the balance of the purchase price and pay the application fee if required for the subject property within blank days. It's not super clear exactly what that's saying.
Subject property.
That's the key word, for the subject property. And so what that's saying is if there's not a pre-approval letter for the subject property within blank days, it's normally blank, so that's 5 days, the seller can back out. So there's another out that the seller probably has that you didn't even realize. So anyways, you can see how that's important as a buyer. When you're representing a buyer, you could all of a sudden have a rescission on your hand after 6 days from the seller and be like, what? How did this happen? And it's because you didn't actually give a pre-approval letter for that specific property. So anyways, that wasn't where I was going with the 22AL, but that's a very, very important piece that you don't see unless you're reading the fine print.
Yeah, you really need to live and breathe the 22A. This is so important. Who wants to waste the seller's market time and momentum of multiple offers and have somebody fail on financing when all of this could have been thought through in advance? I love the 22A. It's awesome. It's written well. You need to understand it. It's very intimidating, though, but we're trying to put it in English. So you need to recite this over and over because your play is going to suck if you go on stage and you just go out there with 2 practice shots, okay? Read this. Read the forms manual. Come in and role play with us because it's intimidating to try to tell the other brokers in a real dance what you're talking about here. You need to practice and recite this. And once you get this down, it's common sense. It's just interpreting the legalese of these forms, getting it into your mouth or in your brain so it comes out of your mouth in good English that makes sense to people, okay? Go on, Isaac.
So this is what the Form 22, skipping back to Form 22AL. So after 10 days, generally, we don't generally counter that because you wouldn't even want to. You don't even need a financing update any sooner than 10 days into a transaction. So
in fact, you don't want to rush it because they're getting the stuff in, right? I mean, you got mutually accepted, and now all of a sudden they got to get a new pre-approval letter with the address on it first, and then the lender goes, "Oh, goody, we got a transaction," and escrow gets set up, and then that lender's got to go grab that file out of their planted seeds, bring it over to the processor, let the processor start working on it, because guess what? The loan officer's out there selling like you. So what's going on behind the scenes is the processor is just seeing what the loan officers got from the buyer on the loan app, and they've got to get some more things. So you don't want to rush it. Let that 10 days, let it season. And then at that 10-day mark, though, you got to be a little concerned because you've got the inspection done. Hopefully that appraisal's on order, and title's working on their stuff. But if they just made a loan application by signing something and giving them the social security number, and there's 15 items out of 20 left on the checklist for documents, that's horrible. That's what you're going to find out here on the response. Go ahead, Isaac.
So again, this is super simple. It's just the seller sending this out. There's really 2 purposes here, in my opinion. Number 1, it's kicking the butt to the lender. It's just saying, hello, everything moving forward. It's like a reminder. This transaction, we're closing in 20 days. Is everything going as planned? Give us an update, right? The second, you're servicing your seller, right? Again, this is an awesome way that you're servicing your seller that most listing agents are not doing. And within 3 days, you're going to get back from the lender the Form 22 AP. And I'll show you what that looks like. Oops.
Now be careful while he's looking this up. These folks in the industry think that they're just going to write you an email back and tell you that things are fine or text you. They got to use the 22 AP. And a lot of them will just kind of give something general, everything's going fine. No, we want a list of conditions. We want an updated pre-approval that shows what conditions are left.
Which is really clear right here. It just says right here, they will use the Form 22 AP notice to reply.
Yeah, that's really clear. It doesn't tell them how to play the game. because lenders pre-approval letters, if you look at them, don't have all the conditions on there because they don't overwhelm people. But there's a laundry list of checklist items that they need to do. They're right there. They're in there. Will they reply to all of those? Will they do a good job? Make sure before they send it back, you give them a phone call and you expect them to fill it out in full, okay?
So again, it's pretty self-explanatory. The lender is just going to fill this out. They're going to say buyer has provided the following information to the lender, and it will indicate exactly what the buyer's provided. It's really just giving us an update. And again, how awesome are you going to look to your seller when 13 days into a transaction, you send this form signed by the buyer and provided by the lender with all this information. You're like, hey, just so you know, this is where we're at in the transaction. The buyer has all this information. This is what they're missing, and I'm following up on it. I mean, because again, everybody knows this. Real estate is not about one transaction with a client, right? If it is, then you're not going to be successful. It's about impressing your client so that they're referring you, right? Referrals are the lifeline of the business. So little things like this, it's going to have a lasting impression on your seller, and they're going to tell everyone about it, right? And that's what you want. So anyways, and again, it's also protecting your seller. So that was the last portion. That's kind of a full rundown of the important parts of the 22A. I think it's applicable whether you're representing a buyer or a seller. Probably more applicable if you're representing the seller. But if you're representing the buyer, really focus, again, not to be redundant, but again, really focus on that first portion. If you just have a blank pre-approval letter for any property, you got to be on your lender right after you have mutual acceptance and say, okay, I need a specific pre-approval letter for the property. Have that on your checklist, right? Send that over right away.
So that's about all there is for page 1. We don't even want to get into page 2. We want to make sure the property appraises. If it doesn't, come see me, because that's not an easy conversation, and that's what's on page 2. Just tell your seller, look, if we overprice it, the market's racing, and we don't get it appraised, we'll deal with it. We'll deal with that page 2 at that time. But you should be okay. We haven't had too many come up. If the market starts to change and we go downward and end up with low appraisals, we'll get into page 2 at that time.
And that actually brings up one last good point. If you're representing the buyer, and actually I would say, and Craig, you can refute this if you disagree, even if you're representing the seller, it is fair on the form. So on the portion 3, section C, appraisal less than sale price. So this is regarding the 22AR. It says, buyer's waiver of the financing contingency under this paragraph will or will not, and it's will if not filled in, constitute waiver of paragraph 7, appraisal less than sale price. Yeah. If you're representing the buyer, absolutely check will not. And the reason is you want to say, yes, we waive our financing. If you're the buyer, sure, we'll waive our financing. But if the appraisal comes in less, that's the exception, right? That's obviously very important, and that's fair, right? You're saying we're not going to lose our job. We're not going to, go finance a motorcycle and then lose our financing, right? We're confident in our financing, but if the appraisal comes in low, that's not on us. That's really on you, seller. So I'm not going to wait. So I'm not going to waive the appraisal price. So again, it's the second box, will not, and this is scary because look at. Will if not filled in. Right. So when you're writing an offer, always check section C on 3, the second box. That's very, very important. And again, if I'm representing the seller, if Craig's representing the seller, that's fair. We wouldn't even count it.
In fact, what we'll do is we'll go into our form template wizard and transaction desk, which you should be using, and we'll check that box so that it's pre-filled. You can override it, I believe, but there's things on the 22D we do that as well. But yeah, just make sure you're paying attention to these check boxes. That's a small one. That one can get lost. Isaac's right. That's scary. Yep.
And I know I say it all the time. Don't hesitate to call, text, email, or just come in the office and go through these. They're overwhelming. I've had the privilege of working with Craig for 3 years and seeing him, really analyze these to death. And so that's that's where this knowledge comes from. It comes from just constant repetition and seeing it over and over and over again and over-analyzing together. Craig and I will sometimes reread a paragraph over and over and over again and be like, wait a second, is it saying this, right? That's where this comes, and it's not going to come overnight. So don't ever feel embarrassed or anything to just come talk with us. That, or just hey, I know we've talked about this, but I just want to clarify. I want to check the second box, right? Because I think I'm reading this right. It's always good to be sure rather than, think you have it under control and then check the wrong box and then be in a world of hurt and then you're calling us and you're in trouble, right?
We create raving fans out there and sellers and buyers, but I want to tell you that we appreciate you at Realty One Group Turnkey. We're growing the brokerage. We'd appreciate raving fans from our brokerage that go out and tell other brokers why they should work here. Again, it's like our sellers. It's not all the bells and whistles that everybody else can provide. And then, sure, Realty One has some better tools than the others beyond the bells and whistles, but I like to say you've got a confident broker and you have confidence in them and you're willing to advocate us. That's why. I mean, go ask Holly Hutchins. Ask Rhonda Hasse. Ask any of these folks at Realty One Group Turnkey if they would refer their designated broker and Isaac Schaefer, who's going to be a designated broker soon. We're not arrogant. We're confident the answer is yes. And that's because of what Isaac just said. We practice, we role play. I went into an attorney the other day for the first time in a long time. We don't usually go to attorneys because why should you? If you can practice role play, read it, and you know it. Until the law changes, these forms are what they are. These are lawyers that wrote them. So we understand it. Have confidence in us. We have your back. Don't be afraid of us or the forms. So once you got this down, it just makes life easy for you because I say life's about the knowns and the unknowns. The more knowns you have, the more confident you are, the more efficient you are. The more unknowns you have, the opposite, right? So let's just get you from the unknown checklist and put those over on the knowns so you could be fantastic at what you do in this regard. And you could then focus on being better at your marketing.
And that is all we have for today. So thank you, everybody, for coming. And we will send this out for the people who weren't able to make it. And we'll see you next week.